Well, I think I'm going to get started then. With that being said, so thank you everyone for coming. So the purpose of this is really just to kind of give some basic overview of kind of a chemist's perspective as what's going on here with CBD and what are some of the forces here, what are some of the compounds that are important, and basically what I want to accomplish here is try and hit somewhere in the middle for the beginners and somewhere in the middle for the advanced users, and then get your guys' feedback as to kind of what these webinars are going to turn into in the future. But with that, let me give you a brief overview of kind of my journey to CBD and through chemistry. Was born in Farmington, Maine, went to undergrad in Ithaca College, New York, and studied materials chemistry there. Went to FSU in Tallahassee and did analytical chemistry there. Awesome. Enjoyed my time there. Studied under Dr. Stigman, and I did microwave catalysis on coal gasification, but that's where I really learned my analytical techniques and analyzing compounds. And then I moved out to Boulder and stumbled into a CBD essential oil company that needed some quality control analysis and also some product development. And it just turned out that I had used the same instrument that all of the essential oils and CBD sort of analysis is run on. And then now I just came to Tampa with my fiance who's studying at USF. But I'm really excited to be a part of the SunMed team, and it seems like the direction that this is going is astronomical, so I'm just excited that this kind of all worked out with this traveling around the country a couple times, but I'm back in Florida and I'm very excited to be here. So let's get started. So basically I'm going to just briefly discuss about some basics here. So what I wanted to start with is chemical signaling. So in our bodies, at all times, there's chemical reactions going on that are all giving chemical data and chemical signaling to different cells. So just basically, if we're going to look at a cartoon version, if we have a sending cell here and we're trying to target some sort of response in a target cell, we're going to send some sort of a ligand and it'll interact with a receptor. And notice the shape here, this circular shape, is kind of like the generic form of it's going to sit right in that receptor response cell. And you can see over here the cell that is not being targeted does not have a receptor. So there's not going to be any communication across the body. But this basic understanding of chemical signaling is really how we can understand how CBD is going in and doing all of the different functions that it does, not just a singular sort of response over the whole body. And what I like to do and what chemists are trying to do right now is try and track these ligand receptor interactions specifically and see, how does that affect ADHD? How does that affect insomnia? How does that affect all those things? You have to go through a lot of complex sort of ligand receptor interactions and kind of deconstruct from there what is going on. And if we can kind of master that, then we can start to, really see some power behind CBD and figure out the exact formulations, the exact sort of targets that we're looking for. So again, more chemical signaling discussion. After that signal is received, there's kind of 4 outcomes that can happen over here. So the communication, that circle lines up right perfectly with the target cell receptor. What it can communicate is, okay, I want that cell to survive, I want that cell to divide, I want that cell to somehow differentiate itself to other cells, or I want it to die. Okay, so these are sort of the very basic building blocks of how we think about how the body's cells are talking to each other and communicating. And a great example of that is the flu virus here. You can see it's got a bunch of receptors, it's got a bunch of ligands here that are going to sort of communicate in different ways and kind of confuse the body into, hey, I want to proliferate, I want to make myself duplicate. I want to divide. I want to go across the body. And this really complex influenza molecule is something that we are still trying to figure out as scientists today. And obviously the cure for the flu is to kind of inject yourself with the flu, and there's some problems with that. But even just understanding this compound and how it interacts in our body is a challenge to us because of all the complications that go into this chemical signaling sort of model that we're looking at. So let's look back at CBD. How does it signal? What are the important signaling responses that we can think about that CBD is doing? So with CBD, we think about direct and indirect interactions. For the direct interactions, let's look at that first. CBD binds perfectly with the same receptors in our body as the opioid receptors. So it does go in and use the same pathway that opioids use to target pain. It also can bind and target and maybe block some of the opioid addiction properties that are there. If it exists there, maybe some people think that opioids can't bind there, and then you don't have this sort of addiction part of opioids. Again, with dopamine, we're talking about depression, mood, another addiction function. So CBD binds perfectly into the dopamine receptor. It also goes in to the serotonin, which is also linked to, a lot of people link it to happiness and that sort of mood thing. So anxiety, addiction, depression again. So we know that CBD binds perfectly here. Let's look at maybe an indirect binding right here. So the cannabinoid receptor, what happens when THC comes in here is you start to get that paranoia of that's associated with THC. CBD can come in here and indirectly sit. You can see this is not a perfect binding match, but it does enough where it can block THC's binding. So this is just some examples of just how we think of CBD going in and creating a chemical response and signaling either indirectly or directly. And these are sort of the ways that we think about how CBD is doing a lot of the neurological work here. These binding processes, I'm simplifying them, right, with these shapes, but obviously these are chemical responses. These are going in and fitting into like little holes in the body. But this is a good overview as to like sort of the power that we know of. CBD can bind to all of these different processes at once. And as we know, if you can somehow control these processes, you can then have profound mood, pain, anxiety, those sort of things can all be treated at once. It's not, one at a time that we're dealing with here. So again, like the shape of this binding, the way that I'm talking about that's kind of the importance of this model. So even though CBD isn't perfectly binding to the cannabinoid receptors, it does affect THC indirectly here. So those are some things that you'll probably hear some of that stuff out there of how THC and CBD kind of work together and all that stuff. A good model is to think about how CBD actually suppresses THC when they're both present. Where if you were just having THC, this would bind fully and you might feel that sense of paranoia and anxiety. So, with chemical signaling stuff, I know that part's going to be the hardest one to kind of visualize or think about, but I did want to give an overview of how the body sort of signals to each other and what's at work here. But let's look at just broadly what's a cannabinoid. So, it's just a class of chemical that alters neurotransmission in the brain, and it does this through the endocannabinoid system. That's all a cannabinoid is. So we can see CBC here, CBD is here, CBG, THC is technically a cannabinoid. So these are the compounds that we're focused on right now. These all come from industrial hemp in various forms. Industrial hemp is extremely high in CBD, and based on your extraction method, you can pull out these other compounds as well. So let's look closely at I wanted to show this is, maybe it looks like, Latin to some people or just completely nonsense, but what this is trying to show here is just how close these compounds are to each other. So they actually are synthesized and started in the plants from the same starting material, and then an enzyme will come in and create them into their acid form, and then heat will turn them into their final product. But you can see here that we got CBD, THC, and CBC, and they all start from this CBGA compound. And then just kind of the inner conversions is what's happening here. So the important thing to think about is we're a CBD company that cares a lot about each one of these components. And the more rigor that we have towards documentation, testing, and all that, we can make sure and confirm that these compounds are what they are. If you're a lesser company, if you haven't done your homework, these things come up very closely in chemical tests. So you really need to have an expert look at your finished goods and your products to make sure that you're not interconverting, that these during the extraction process you're pulling the right amount. And obviously for legality, when it comes to THC, we can't have more than 0.3. So obviously testing for these extremely close structurally looking cannabinoids is an important thing that we're extremely worried about here, and something that we think about every day, then we try and target. So this is also a good example of, if you see how close these are, these things are going to bind very similarly, and this might be the reason behind the entourage effect that I'm going to talk about later. But if you're familiar with the entourage effect, I invite you just to kind of look at these compounds and how close they are. They're a couple carbons away, especially CBD and THC. So this is kind of the theory behind the entourage effect. When you have similar types of chemical structure, then you have similar types of reaction, and then maybe it can kind of push a reaction towards one direction if you have some of the same similarities on the structure. So as a chemist, that's kind of what I look at. I look at each one of these compounds. Where is it going to react? What's the difference reactivity-wise? And that's kind of what the research is looking at too. How do these chemical reactions change signals in the body, and what is the repercussions of that if we add in more CBC, if we add in more CBD, if we add in more THC? What are the real differences from the chemical signaling perspective? So with that's kind of the background. So that's going to be most of the hard science here. I like to get it over with early. So let's just talk briefly about why CBD is working. Why is it that the pharmaceutical companies, medicine companies are all starting to kind of realize that this is a big player and people are having amazing responses neurologically from pain? So it's how it's targeting the signaling responses in our body. It's not just a single target. It's not going after one receptor. It's a holistic approach over the entire body. And when you have that holistic approach where you're binding to different chemical signals, you have a greater potential to affect the body on a whole. So that means that you can change somebody's mood while giving them anti-inflammation while helping them with pain all at once. And that's not because it's by accident. It's because it's an entire plant molecule with all of these different compounds coming in at once and working together synergistically. Where modern medicine, right, we think about the side effects of modern medicine. You may go and help your headaches, but you'll have a side effect of vomiting, or your stomach lining gets torn apart, because you're just modulating one section of the body of the neurological network or of the signaling patterns, and you have no idea what the downstream effect is on another part of your body. With CBD, we're coming in with all of these compounds at once like a wave over the body, and because it's derived naturally from plants, nature has got a very nice way of generating almost a perfect formulation. And again, we can work with that formulation to dial it in even more, but it's got a great starting point as compared to like an opioid, right? That has all these unattended side effects. So side effects of CBD, sometimes you see, improved quality of life. You get some weight loss, a better mood. Those are the side effects that we're excited about. from a medicine perspective. We do not want to modulate the body and hope that we didn't mess up another portion of the body. So that's not the goal. But from a side effect point, that's kind of why people are starting to get super excited about CBD as well. So let's just, again, talk about sort of the journey of CBD. As this stuff has gotten going, more and more research has been done from the government and from different universities. And as that, over the last decade, we've started to see amazing trials in rats and mice. And now those are starting to shift towards human trials and towards more profound effects. And the reason that this is, again, such a hotbed of research is the endocannabinoid system itself, which is how CBD functions, and it's down here in the bottom right here. It covers our entire body, and it has the most amount of signaling pathways compared to the immune, the nervous system, muscular system. So it has the most amount of signals that are going off. So what that means to me is that we have a real opportunity here to have some global impact over the entirety of your body. It's not just a single target. So we're not just going in and working on one part of your arm here. I mean, you can do that with topical creams with localized treatment, but the whole idea is that it's a synergistic effect throughout the body, and the endocannabinoid system is all over us, and that eventually funnels back up to the brain and gives, the brain signals to make positive changes in the body. So another great part about this is that it's not addictive, and that's one of the most important things to sort of help this research and funding it. It would, even with all of these profound changes, if it was addictive, there might still be money behind it and research behind it. But the fact that it's not addictive, the World Health Organization, the FDA, everyone has come out and said there's no toxicity problems, there's no addiction problems. So what that means is that we can actually start to utilize this in human trials a lot faster than we would have if it was a pharmaceutical, for example. Those sort of trials are going to start to come out in the next 5 or 6 years as GW Pharmaceuticals and other companies like that have gotten patents on their CBD blends that are targeted for neurological disorders. So we have a big opportunity to target, like I said, the whole body, and then also there's some neurological mysteries that have already been unlocked with very rare seizures that are exciting to maybe think about Alzheimer's, think about really profound neurological problems that we don't really have kind of time to just reinvent new things. We really have to utilize what are some possible solutions here. So anything that can go in that's not addictive, it's going to be a huge boon for the research side of things too. So let's look now to two different compounds. So these are two cannabinoids that our body naturally produces. They're the only two that we produce naturally. So just like CBD is a cannabinoid, that's an exterior cannabinoid. So nature creates that. It just so happens that we have interacted with it and it binds with our cannabinoid system. But humans produce only two natural cannabinoids. And one is called anandamide. And people call this the bliss molecule. It's one of the things that they target for antidepressant. And what CBD does with anandamide is it'll come in and it'll actually affect this big Pac-Man looking protein, which will turn it from a neuroactive anandamide, which is associated with regulating our calcium channels. But basically, the more of this, the more that we are in a positive mood is how we think about our antidepressant sort of model. What FAH does is it'll chop this up and make it inactive. But what CBD does that's great is it comes in and actually exists inside of this big protein, and it'll just block this process. So almost indirectly, again, the natural bliss molecule that people care about CBD is going in and just making sure that it is preserved as much as it can to a natural state. So this is sort of that when people talk about a nice calm, even keel feeling on CBD, this is the theory behind that. This is where that sort of comes from. And then the other compound that we wanted to talk about is 2-AG. And this is naturally found in breast milk. And so the interesting part of 2-AG is that it's sort of that calm sensation that people attribute to when your child's breastfeeding. If that's an experience that you've had, I'm not sure. But that's the theory behind it, is that it's a calming sensation that goes in the body. So 2-AG is also modulated by CBD. So these two natural cannabinoids that we produce, and those ones are associated with pain, appetite, mood, sleep, memory, movement, and reproduction functions. So the fact that CBD is working on these two things is really important to me, because those are the natural things. Those are sort of the parts of our body that are naturally regulated. And with so much of these synthetic pharmaceutical type routes, they don't look at how are these natural cannabinoids being done. And there's been a lot of studies showing that most adults have an enormous fluctuation between these naturally produced cannabinoids. And because CBD works with them and it helps modulate and regulate them and keep them even, we've started to see that this sort of natural preservation by CBD is something that we need to think about going forward when we're formulating drugs or targeting different things. We want to make sure that when we're changing something, the natural production of these cannabinoids stays intact. So again, it's extremely exciting to see that we can target such big things and then still keep the body modulated in a normal sort of naturalistic preservation. So with that, we're going to move on to some food analogy. So I actually thought of this today. I thought of just dropping it in here so we can have some basic food analogies. So when we think about what makes SunMed, Sunflora the best product, right? What we want to think about is a perfect plate of seasoned chicken with great side dishes and all the spices in there, and it's delicious. That's the sort of product we want. What we don't want is the bland piece of chicken by itself. That over there, that pure CBD, that would be like an isolate. So this by itself is okay, but it's definitely not this over here. Other cannabinoids, CBC, CBG, CBN, those are like the sort of side dishes. These definitely do something, but they're not the main course like CBD is, okay? And with terpenes, I think of those like the spices. You can add them in to sort of drive the dish towards a savory, towards a spicy, towards whatever dish you're trying to look for. So when we think of a full spectrum CBD product, we can mix and match these to get maybe a desired effect on the other end. And each one of these components works synergistically together. So, and if you separate each one of them out, they're less powerful. So plants already do this. When you think of plant medicine, they actually have all of this stuff in it in a natural state. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take this sort of natural state and then just add in a few different spices, take out a few of the cannabinoids maybe like THC and other things that are undesired effects, and try and find the right formulation that we can target sort of profound effects without the undesired parts of the dish, if you will. So I think that's a cool sort of metaphor. I'm going to use it a little bit more going forward when we talk about some other components here. So we're going to first start with terpenes. So these are like I said, these are the spices. These are the small additives that are present. So what are terpenes? They're sort of lighter compounds that come out when you're extracting hemp. So this is a chemical report that I actually ran on hemp. And And you can see here I've highlighted 4 of these terpenes, and I'm going to just talk about these 4. You could literally talk about each one of these specifically. They all have amazing research behind them, and they're all very, very new research articles within the last 10 years. So people are thinking that these spices, these little additives that are part of the plant, they actually are going in and helping CBD do its job. So let's start with alpha-pinene and just see some of the benefits of alpha-pinene. So this is basically that smell you get off of a pine tree, off of pine needles. It's that really bright sort of hyper green smell. So it turns out that what they think that is useful for is from asthmatics and helping our breathing, helping our focus, helping our anxiety. So these are all parts of, and each one of these sort of things that I've written out here, these are each have 2 or 3 different pieces of literature tied to them where they test this stuff. They do memory, they do anti-anxiety tests with mice and rats, and they test these things, and they're not quite human trials yet, but these things have amazing effects neurologically that we can already test. So in theory, what this is going to do is if it has this ability to target memory, then CBD will also go in and target memory. It kind of primes the neurons, it primes those chemical signals so that CBD can come in after and work in that area. So it's basically like, it basically drives what direction you're going to use CBD, because CBD works on all facets, all fronts in the endocannabinoid system. If you can kind of lead it in a direction with pinene and say, I want to add more pinene in here and try and see if the CBD will make me more alert, it will add on to that CBD effect. It'll add on to the pinene effect. It works together synergistically. And just a side note, Project CBD is where I got this specific, thing for alpha pinene, this little readout about acetylcholinease. But Project CBD is one of the best resources that you could ever use. It's a nonprofit in California, and they do a bunch of medical research. They do a lot about safety, FDA regulation. So if you're ever in sort of I need an unbiased opinion of a question, go check out Project CBD. Their research articles are all there available for you. So it's a really good resource, and it helped kind of start a lot of these understandings I have with terpenes too, about 3 or 4 years ago when I first looked into this stuff. So yeah, just an aside. And so let's go on to beta-myrcene. That's another one of the terpenes that we were talking about. So this one's about 20%. You can see the pinene not as prevalent, but in theory, if you just add more pinene, you should get a more alertness, more memory-focused CBD. So beta-myrcene, what is that? That's in mangoes, it's in basil, it's in hops. It's one of the oldest studied terpenes. And what this has been shown to do is a profound anti-pain, a profound anti-inflammatory, and one of the ones that we don't see that often in our terpenes is a gastrointestinal anti-inflammation target. So this is really the one that kind of blew the medical marijuana research out and made it so, after chemo, how do we have a pain relief that doesn't destroy our gastrointestinal? People started to make strains of medical marijuana that had beta-myrcene all through it. So this is one of those early 1990s kind of, grandfather of terpene chemistry that existed, and one of the most studied terpenes. So there's a bunch of research on this, but it's interesting that it's in mangoes and it's in hops too. So you can see the diversity. It's not like a specific sort of aroma or smell, as the pinene is, where it's like a pine oil smell. So this one is a complex one, and but again, as you add it in, you can get more gastrointestinal targeting. So let's look at limonene. Limonene is in all citruses. Every single citrus in the world has limonene. It's basically attributed to that aroma, that bright, fresh smell. So that smell, sometimes you sort of associate smells with feelings. Well, it turns out that limonene has been studied for anti-anxiety, for uplifting, for antidepressant stuff. So it's going in and it's targeting those sort of that anandamide molecule that we talked about earlier. It's going in and helping regulate that again. It is also great at an antioxidant and is a great radical scavenger. So we're thinking about possible formulations down the future of through creams and through different tinctures, but this is a good example of how it could be great for topical use as well. So it smells bright and uplifting, but it also is a free radical scavenger. So antioxidant power for sure in this one. And then probably my favorite at this point, it's the Superman of terpenes, in my opinion. This one's being studied by the FDA for cancer, for anti-tumor growth, because it is one of the best anti-inflammatory compounds on the market on anywhere. So it's found in copaiba balsam, and it's found a lot in CBD. So if you look at almost any CBD terpene profile, it better have this in it. So if it doesn't have this in it, you probably know, okay, they added the terpenes after the fact and they didn't quite think to add the best one. So this one is all over our full spectrum, our broad spectrum. If you look at the chemical readouts of that. So what this will do, because it's such a super anti-inflame, it's going to, again, bring CBD with it. And the interesting thing about it is that it binds to the CB2 cannabinoid receptor. It's something that CBD has trouble to bind to. But this is another global signaling device in the body that is responsible for pain, appetite, and anti-inflammation. And then, because it's such a super anti-inflammatory response, there's been anti-tumor growth studies all over the place with this, with rats, over the last decade. So at some point, and what I saw recently is the company that just patented the GW Pharmaceutical just patented the anti-seizure FDA-regulated compound. They're actually starting to do a full spectrum study where they're going to try and patent a cancer cell line drug that is only based in CBD. So this could be part of the reason behind that. Obviously, I don't know everything about that research and where it is going, but this one excites me in a lot of ways. If we could create a huge anti-inflammatory response and target it towards a cancer cell line, that could have an amazing transformation on what we think of for CBD and its power. So I'm wrapping up here. Got a couple more slides. This is basically the last part I wanted to talk about is what's the difference between our stuff, our full spectrum, and maybe another company who's doing just isolate. So if you're an isolate, that means that you're 99% CBD, and you don't really have those terpenes, and you don't have those cannabinoids at all. Basically, you maybe have a few terpenes in there, and you're gonna be this kind of bland chicken. So the other bad part about isolate is it in some cases, especially with the anti-pain, it has an optimal dosage that you have to find. And so that means that, and this is actually from a paper where the optimal dosage turned out to be 7 for the response, 7 milligrams. And then as you added more milligrams of the CBD, it started to deactivate the anti-pain and the anti-inflammation. So in this case, that's going to be a tricky spot for consumers to find that optimal dosage bell curve. So what's amazing is that once you move over the full spectrum, this bell curve goes away, and it's just a pure straight line. So as you add in more, you get more anti-pain. As you add in more CBD, you get more anti-inflammation. So these sort of responses and these sort of trickinesses of dosage kind of go away as we add in the terpenes, as we add in the cannabinoids. So it's another argument for this entourage effect and for this pure synergy that we're seeing with having the entire plant there with the terpenes and the other cannabinoids, and we don't have this sort of bland chicken where we're trying to deal with what's the exact dosage here that we need. We just kind of add in more CBD if you need to. If you're feeling like the anti-pain isn't working, you add more in. In this model, if you add in more, maybe your pain actually starts to get worse. So we absolutely don't want that product. And if you can educate your customers on the real difference between our stuff and other people's stuff, it's going to be our full spectrum. It's going to be how we think about terpenes, how we think about all the cannabinoids, and how we think about that going in and healing the entire body and not just having a single compound go in and try and modulate. So again, the last slide I have for you guys. What did we learn? Full spectrum is king. Isolate is inferior. This is CBD with all the other cannabinoids here. I just want to point out, look at all of these different sort of research topics here. Relieves pain, relieves anxiety, slows bacterial growth, helps blood sugar levels. These are just the responses that we know of at this point. And that's with sort of these synergistic effects. And I just wanted to point out, it's possible that CBC could be actually better than CBD. But we don't know that at this point because the research is just sort of started on CBD and these other compounds. So at some point, maybe this pie chart maybe looks slightly different. Maybe the best looking full spectrum would be something that has a bunch of CBC, a bunch of CBG. So each one of these compounds, because they're so close and because they work in the endocannabinoid system, the research is going to kind of tell us which one is preferred and which one can target specific, cancer cell growths, as CBC has been touted to do in a few cases. So when we're maybe looking for insomnia relief, maybe we add more CBG in the compound. So these are sort of the questions that we still have to answer, but for sure what we know is that if this whole pie chart is CBD, then what we can target is going to be limited compared to if we had all of these guys together. And that's why full spectrum is king, and that's why Marcus and everybody that's been looking and sourcing this material is just targeting full spectrum or broad spectrum CBD. So with that, I just wanted to kind of wrap up and say, over this next week, I know that was a lot of information, but I'm going to make the slides available to everybody through a PDF, and we'll try and figure out the best way to deliver that, probably just through Gmail. But over the week, I wanted you guys to direct message me on WhatsApp any questions at all. It could be the silliest question. It could be the most profound question that I may never get to answer. But I wanted you to directly message me and, ask away. Any question at all that you feel like asking, please do. And then next week, I'd like to meet up with whoever wants to come on board and talk about those questions and kind of have a Q&A out there, and I'll kind of set up the questions, give them out to you guys beforehand so you can see what was the most asked sort of topic and that sort of thing. And then 2 weeks from now, I wanted to kind of give a talk over the legal status, oral history of CBD, how it became legal, and then sort of the claims that the FDA has said are okay, acceptable. And today I found a World Health Organization special counsel meeting in 2017, and it kind of helps us understand what are the claims that, from a global perspective, not just in the U.S., what does the rest of the world think about CBD? So that's going to be the topic in 2 weeks. So I invite you to come by then. It should be a lot less sciencey and a lot more sort of targeting what the FDA claims are and what to say to customers in certain situations and all that stuff. And then as we go forward, I'd like to do certain topics that you guys are interested in. If there's more feedback, if you guys want, more basics, if you want just on, what's the Alzheimer's research looking like, I would love to kind of do that too. So, but tentatively, that's what I have scheduled, is the legal status and that sort of thing. So again, just please ask me questions, and don't feel bad if you think it's not a good question. It's usually a good question. And so the other thing that I will be hopefully helping with is if you guys do have these branding sort of questions and that stuff, I'm right here with our new marketing guy, Adam. And what we're going to be doing is we work together every day next to each other. So there's going to be, if you guys have feedback to me, I can tell him. And if it's like a messaging branding question, I can feed that to him. And maybe he can start to do webinars as well for you guys as the need starts to pop up more and more as we move along here. But I did want to say, like, from my perspective, we're already a premier brand. We're already moving in such a fast pace and such a great direction. And I think that we can keep pushing the industry in a good space with our transparency, with all of our research that we need. And eventually what we want to do is obviously get more CBD to more people and help educate them and take their health into their own hands. So thank you guys. And if you guys have any questions and stuff, just let me know. But that is it for today.